I want to begin by asking you an honest question. And you don't have to raise your hands if you're not comfortable with that, but just want to engage in a little bit of a conversation. How many of you have walked into a school with a pair of scissors? How many of you maybe walked in school or got into a conversation with your teacher or administrator or someone who's in authority and maybe have talked back to that person? Yeah. How many of you may have been in school and got into a small altercation with someone in school and had a conflict with another student in school? So here's how that works. Before 1994, in the mid-1990s, we all know what happened. The majority of those kids, what happened? We would go down to our principal or disciplinarian, and they would give us some demerits, or they would give you in-school, out-of-school suspension. Now, I started out in elementary school and Catholic school. I went to public school system. So we were told to go to the third floor and see the nun. And usually on the third floor was the biggest nun in the convent, and she had a yardstick that looked like it was 6 feet, not 3 feet. And all of you who come from that setting knows what happens. Let's fast forward now into the 1994, 1995. The Gun-Free Act, the Federal Gun-Free Act is put in place. And now we start to make this transition where we're going to put police officers in our schools. We're going to start addressing what was normal adolescent behavior now is going to now require policing. So, coming in school with a scissors under the Gun-Free Act. See, listen, we all understand that having a gun in school. Does anyone want a gun in school? I don't want a gun in here right now. But when did a gun become a scissors or that Cub Scout knife that you like to carry? And so we move into this process where we start to have this, this process of school to prison pipeline. Arresting our kids in school. Now that's just a part of it. The other part is we won't talk about is suspensions and expulsions, and that is also a driver. But for today, we talk about the school to prison pipeline and zero tolerance in our schools. We're no longer going to, and we're not going to deal with the issues that drive that and where that's coming from. We're not going to deal with the issues that when we arrest a child that their potential of going on to college, the collateral consequences that goes with that is significant. It is significant. And when we look at this issue, we also have to look at the issue around racial disparity. The majority of the kids across this nation who are being arrested are African American, Latino kids. In some cases, 2 to 3 times their white student counterpart. Why is that? Why is everywhere I go across this nation that is occurring? It's a conversation that we need to be having. It's a conversation that needs to be brought to the top. See, here's how I believe. I believe that normal adolescent behavior, kids should be given a second chance. Let's stick for a minute. And because by not arresting those kids, we have the potential to improve them, improve their academics, improve their social part of that, and their well-being. And we can do that both regionally, locally, and across this nation. When I think about the process for me, I was, as you heard, a deputy commissioner to fill up the police department for over almost 29 years. I was in the police department. I retired January of last year, where I moved on to take over the school diversion program in the city of Philadelphia, which we work together. And because if we're going to deal with this issue around the school to prison pipeline, it will be a multi-pronged approach. It's going to require all of us in this room to engage. So we became, as a collective group, decided that let me think about this. If we train our officers around adolescent development, if we train our officers around behavioral health, if we give them tools to be able to do something with a child differently than arresting them, give them a second chance, that we could change the trajectory of that child moving forward. And so, oftentimes there's this myth. There's this myth that our young kids are out there just engaged in so much violence. I mean, if you look at the media and you look at the news and you listen to legislators who are running, and the kids are out there just doing all this crazy crime. For those in the room who've been around, the super predator who was supposed to be coming, he or she never arrived. And so, I put the dot up on the screen. You see the dot, and you say, what is that? You know what that dot represents? That dot represents the number of kids across this nation who get involved in violent crime. That sea of black that you see is the 95% of the kids across this nation who get involved in non-violent crime. A large percentage of that is just minor crimes. And in that 95%, in all of that, is what? We know that there's poverty in our community. Some people don't want to address that variable. We know that there's disparities in our community. We know that many of these kids come from violent homes, poverty, and all kinds of issues in their homes. And oftentimes we put up this shell as if it doesn't exist. See, here's the thing. People ask you, why are you in this space? Why do you talk about young people? Yeah, I talk about young people because I could be them. You take that slide back, I could be them. My mother raised 4 boys. My father left when we were babies, young kids, early as 5 years old, left my mother with 4 boys. I remember those days coming home when there was no gas. I remember those days when there was no electricity. I remember coming home one time and the truck is there and they take all of our furniture and put it in this truck and they take it away. All my mother's stuff and our trophies, never to see it again. See, I remember that, but guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I had people in my life to help me, to give me a chance. I think about my godparents who stepped in to be parents to me, and my godfather, who took me into his small business and had me work after school. I remember those coaches, those teachers, those administrators, all those people in school who helped me and who gave me respect and who gave me love. See, I put that picture of me up on the screen because you know what? I loved school. It was a place when things were crazy. I had a good house. Don't get me, I was poor, but my mother made a good house. But I got on that bus because school was a place where I wanted to be. And school was a place where I could survive and move on. That was that place for me. I meant to say in the opening, and I bring it back because it's too important to miss. But listen, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't become a cop to lock up children. I didn't become a cop to take a 10-year-old child and put him or her in a car and take him away. That's not why I came into this business. And that's why it's so important that I believe policing has such a significant role in bringing about this change. So as I move through my life and I go on to school, I go on to college, let me tell you, I ain't do too well. So I flunk out of college and I go back and get my degrees later on, but I leave school and I go back in the community, but I'm blessed to be able to come on the police department because I get a chance to come on the police department. From that process on, I moved through the ranks, and the last 7 years I served as deputy commissioner in the police department. But over the last 5 years of my time, and I became immersed in juvenile justice. I needed to know what was going on with our young people. What were the drivers? What is the trauma that was impacting our young people? And we're arresting them and avoiding that. Because here's the thing. It's one thing if I asked a child, what did you do? Let me change that question. What happened to you? What happened to you? All too often when we ask that question is we get so many different answers. As a result of that, I was fortunate through the supports of the Philadelphia Police Department, Commissioner Ross, who was a phenomenal police commissioner in Philadelphia, and his prior Commissioner Ramsey, working with the Department of Human Service under Commissioner Figueroa and her team, working with the school district as part of this process, and part of my Stonely Foundation has given me the opportunity and the foundation to work in this space full time to say we can do something different. How do we do that differently? We created a program to say, you know what, when we go into school, we're not going to arrest that child. Matter of fact, we're not going to put them in cuffs. We're going to have social workers, Department of Human Services social workers, who do a phenomenal job, go into those homes and see what's going on in those houses. For those of you in this space, you know what's going on in those houses. When we get behind those doors, we see all of that trauma, no gas, no electric, all the things I talked about exist in those homes. And they work with those families to get them back on track. We're working with those families to help them through this process. And as a result, we're having amazing results. So let me share you my results. We went from a school district that was locking up almost 1,600 kids a year, majority of them for those minor adolescent offenses, and said, well, you know what? If we're giving these kids a second chance, and let's see how it works. As you see, we went to a system that did almost 560, a 64% reduction in school arrests since May of 2014 when we started this process. 1,400 kids are now been diverted who are not getting arrested, who have no paperwork, no collateral consequences of that arrest. You know what is also exciting? Two other things. We have officers in the Philadelphia Police Department who work the schools, who are the ambassadors for this program, and I could be no more proud of them. Because they go in there, 80% of those officers say, you know what, boss, we need to be doing that stuff across the nation. We need to be doing that stuff across the state. This is too good to keep it in Philadelphia. We all should be doing this across the process. And here's the most other exciting part. When we get into those homes, we don't have a judge telling us that you have to do anything. We don't go in there with any stick. We go in there in the Department of Human Services, social workers do a great job of going there, talking to those families, building trust with those families, and 90% of those families will engage. Why? Because they need help. And when you bring that to the doorstep in a respectful way, you'll be amazed and shocked how people will respond. Amazed and shocked. Again, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about a second chance. And so there's a quote here. It says, change is the only thing we dislike more than things staying the same. You all can relate to that. We want to change it. Man, it takes courage. You know, sometimes you heard these conversations from these amazing speakers. It takes courage to start to move into that space because I believe we can be the change agents in this process. From a policing perspective, we can be those change agents because we can dismantle the school to prison pipeline. And it has to be done working in a constructive way. And so I make this message to across the board. I say to the chiefs and law enforcement across this nation that you are the change agent as I have been and we have become. That if you go into the space, 85% of the kids who come into the criminal justice system come in by police. If we change, if our chiefs and our law enforcement officers start to understand that if we can deal with the root issues of these young people's problems and they won't come back, isn't that the better equation? You know, to my service providers and those who are in the room, first and foremost, I say thank you. I'll let that sit there for a minute. I say thank you because, over my 29 years in law enforcement, I was a social worker, a caseworker, a psychologist. I played those roles. I had young people next to me and I played those roles. I wasn't good at it. I'm not a professional. And so the reality is, as I come to this place, we need you. We need you to teach us how to do this process, help us understand how we can work with young people, to be a part of this collaboration because collectively we can make change. To those of you in the community, I say the time is now for you to step up. The time for you to be the advocates. So those mothers, those grandfathers, those preachers, those wives, listen, we all want our schools to be safe. We all agree with that. Do you agree with me taking a 10-year-old child because she went through a metal detector and took a pair of scissors through the metal detector is keeping us safe? Do you believe if I have a child who's been sexually abused and I arrest her and never answer those questions, that's keeping us safe? It's not. And so you can be that advocate in this process. You can be that advocate. And so I'll ask you, I started out this conversation asking you 3 questions. I'm going to ask you 3 more now. Are we prepared to stop criminalizing and putting our youth in the criminal justice system for coming to school with a pair of scissors? Are we prepared to stop criminalizing and bringing our young people in school, into the prison system for having a minor scuffle? Are we prepared to stop criminalizing our young people and bring them in the criminal justice system for talking back to someone who has a teacher and somebody, an administrator? I think we are. So I'll leave you with a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. He says, "The time is always right to do what is right." I submit to you that the time is right now to give our kids a second chance. Thank you, everyone.